How Iryna's law changes how the death penalty and capital punishment will work here in North Carolina. The bill was signed into law by Governor Josh Stein on Friday.
So here's a look at how North Carolina's death row stacks up to neighboring states. Right now, the state has 122 people on death row. That's more than South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, and Virginia combined.
WBTV's Katie Solt has been looking into the history of capital punishment and explains the changes this new law creates.
Due to ongoing legal challenges, North Carolina has not carried out an execution since 2006. But one expert I spoke to says that wasn't always the case. And now he's watching to see how Iryna's law will change capital punishment.
North Carolina is actually historically one of the most active users of the death penalty.
Frank Baumgardner, a professor at UNC Chapel Hill, has extensively studied the death penalty and how it's used around the country and in North Carolina.
We've had over 400 people sentenced to death since 1976, but only 43 executions. And there haven't been any executions since 2006.
Under Iryna's law, reviews of someone sentenced to death now have to happen within 2 years, something Baumgardner says is unrealistic.
Many people aren't even assigned an attorney for 2 years after they're sentenced to death. So it's quite problematic, and that will definitely be litigated because it's kind of an arbitrary deadline. And the courts aren't funded to deal with these things quickly.
He also says historically, many people also end up getting their death sentence overturned.
70% of all death sentences are overturned on appeal, which is probably surprising to people. And those reversals of sentence, that don't mean that the person goes free. Typically, it means that their death sentence is reversed and they have a new sentence of life without the possibility of parole. Those things often happen 25 and 30 years after the death sentence, which is also quite surprising, and you could call it dysfunctional.
And I reached out to lawmakers on both sides of the aisle to ask specific questions about the death penalty changes. I did not hear back. Reporting in West Charlotte, Katie Solt, WBTV, on your side.
Katie, thank you.